and a motivational speaker, holds a degree in engineering and law and specialization in patent law. His leadership seminars are popular with top-level management in corporate houses. He also helps individuals deal with modern life situations by applying the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana, and other dharmic traditions. His latest book is Ramayana, the Game of Life, Rise of the Sun Prince. Mr. Shiva Vilas, please welcome.
So I'm going to say good afternoon. Thank you, all of you, for coming here. Both of them are friends of mine, so we're going to make it like really casual, not formal, and make it as interesting for you to delve into, to understand a bit of where our two illustrious friends come from, what kind of mental and spiritual space they come from. I think the best way to do this would be if we could have Shubh Vilas ji, who will give you a small 5-10 minute PowerPoint presentation on how he approaches his subjects. You will soon know what those subjects are. He's speaking first? Okay, so his laptop is there. Good enough. And we'll start with my good friend Ashwin Sanghi, who, for me, has written 3 of the most remarkable books that anybody could have written in the past 20 years. What I found interesting about his books, the first book is called The Rosable Line. The second book is called Chanakya's Chant. Have I got that right, Ashwin?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. And the third book is called the Krishna Key. And the Krishna Key is, for me, a sort of, you know, a theme which also interests me. So we're going to have a presentation done by Ashwin, and then we'll follow it up with Shubh Vilas, and then we'll have a question-answer session with them. Is that good? Yes. Is that good? Yes. Ashwin, let's welcome Ashwin Sanghi.
I know that we've got a very short time on hand, so I will try and keep this as crisp as possible. What I want to discuss with you for 10 minutes is about some of the thoughts that came into my head at the time when I was writing my books. And it's a theme which fascinates me because I genuinely believe that we are much more connected than we care to believe, whether it's in terms of our mythology, whether it's in terms of our theology, whether it's in terms of our history, whether it's in terms of our cultural belief system. So I'd like just to present to you just some of these thoughts in no particular order. You know, it was Steve Jobs who said that creativity is just connecting things. When you ask creative people how they did something, they feel a little guilty. Because, you know, they just saw something and it seemed obvious to them. And that's pretty much what I have been doing at the time when I've been writing my books. Because I'm not a historian, I'm not a theologian, I'm not a scholar like Swamiji. So to that extent, I start with a completely blank page of paper. As they say, you know, a myth is a lie. But it's a lie that reveals a truth. And this is something which has always fascinated me, the idea that a myth could reveal a deeper truth, undoubtedly. Right now, Swamiji and I were talking about the fact that it doesn't matter as to whether our mythology was real or not, whether it had a historical basis or not. The mere fact that it reveals a deeper underlying truth, that in itself is good enough for us. But for me, what excites me is the fact that maybe we could take this literally. Maybe we could say that our mythological figures were real, that they actually existed. So let me start by giving you an example. You know, this is a picture of a temple. It's a temple in Calcutta. And I don't know if you can see the deity out there, but the deity is Amitabh Bachchan. And I visited this particular temple and I was fascinated because there is actually a Panditji who comes in there 4 times a day in order to do an aarti. And you can see even his shoes have been kept out there. And outside the temple, you can buy a small prayer book which is known as the Amitabh Chalisa. And, you know, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I thought to myself, now this is where it gets interesting. I thought to myself that what if I was to die tomorrow morning and I came back to this world, let's say 300 or 500 years later, and now Amitabh worship is no longer just limited to one temple, but now there are 500 or maybe 1,000 temples where Amitabh worship is happening. And I turn around to someone and I say, do you think that this God that they call Amitabh could have been a real man? Well, you know, our mythology is precisely that. Maybe there was some great individual, whether it was Ram, whether it was Krishna, whether it was Jesus, and maybe because of their greatness of their deeds, we decided to worship them. So, since I started off with this Amitabh bit, let me tell you about a little more of the connecting the dots. This is, of course, Amitabh from his famous movie in which he wears the billa, which has the 786 on it. And it would interest you to note that actually this 786 comes from the first verse of the Quran, Bismillah al-Rahman al-Rahim, the very first line. And you know, in Arabic, you have a numerical value attached to each alphabet. So the total numeric value of this first line of the Quran is 786. And that's why all across South Asia, Muslims consider this to be a very sacred number. So for example, you can go back to coins of 1616, which have the number 786 minted on them. There are people who will register their cars with the number 786. There are those who will take phone numbers which have the number 786. You can even see Mithun Da with 786. And of course, there's Akshay Kumar in Khiladi 786. So there's lots of 786s. And there's a reason for that. But for a minute, I want to take you through this number, 786. And now let's write this number in Hindi. And let's look at each of these individual components, the 7, the 8, and the 6. See where I'm going with this? Let's flip it around. What do you get? So that's a connection of the dots for you. That's one of the ways that you can connect dots. Let's look at, for example, the concept of good and evil. All mythology, all philosophy has the concept of good versus evil. And of course, in Hinduism, we've always had the devas as the force of good, and we've had the asuras as the forces of evil. But in Zoroastrianism also, we've had the ahuras and the daivas. Of course, mirror opposites, really, in that sense, because my good guys are your bad guys, and your bad guys are my good guys. So what does it tell me? Well, probably it tells me that there is, again, something where we need to connect the dots. And we need to say that probably there was a point of common origin, and for whatever reasons, they went their separate ways. So as a result of which, my enemy's enemy became my friend, to that extent. Let's take this a little further. For example, the origin of Judaism, Abraham. We know Abraham was a historical figure. Excuse me, I need some water. We know that Abraham was a historical figure. Lived sometime around 3000 odd BC in Mesopotamia, in a little town which is known as Ur. And what is very interesting to my mind, of course, is the fact that if I was to take this name Abraham and take the A out of that Abraham and put it at the end, I get Brahma. And of course, as per the Old Testament, we know that Abraham had a wife. His wife's name was Sarah. And of course, we always know that Brahma and Saraswati are shown. Saraswati is the consort. So again, what does it tell me? That there is a dot to be connected. That we are much more interconnected than we care to imagine. Let's go a little further. In the Bible, we have the concept of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. In Hinduism also we have trinities, right? We have the male trinity and the female trinity, which is Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, and Lakshmi, Saraswati, Kali. And now let's just plonk these two triangles together. We get a 6-pointed star. I'm just wondering, you could possibly say that it's the Star of David. Now, this would not have interested me till the time that I was writing my last book, The Krishna Key, and I was researching into the temple of Somnath and the fact that Muhammad Ghazni had invaded this temple so often. And I found that a lithograph, which was done by an English lieutenant. And what is very interesting is that, if you look at this is the tomb of Muhammad Ghazni. It's depicted in this picture. But look a little carefully, you'll find where the red circle is. I don't know if you can see a 6-pointed star out there. You'll see another one there, and you can see there are actually more than that, but these are the ones which are very clearly visible on that picture. What is interesting is the fact that during his last raid, Muhammad Ghazni picked up the sandalwood doors from the temple of Somnath, and they were carried back to Afghanistan. And when he died, those very temple doors were installed outside his tomb. So actually the doors that you are seeing there actually have, to that extent, a motif which shows where there is the intersection between Islam and Hinduism. The way I look at it is that the intention is not to say that which came first. Let's for a minute put that aside. The intention is to say that there's so much more in common between world faiths and between world religions. Take, for example, here in Srinagar. This was the subject of my first book, actually, where there is a tomb which is known as Rozabal. It is called the Tomb of the Prophet. And the interesting thing is that the sarcophagus lies in a north-south axis along the Islamic tradition. But the grave below lies in an east-west axis, which is a Jewish burial. And outside the tomb is a carving of a pair of feet, which have crucifixion marks on it. And so the concept of that first novel which I wrote was that could this be the final resting place of Jesus Christ? And of course, there's a single sentence that describes the life of Jesus from age 12 to 30. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. 18 years described in that one single sentence. And where was he for those 18 odd years? So in 1887, a Russian explorer, Nicholas Notovich, visited Hemis in Ladakh. And inside the Buddhist monastery of Hemis, he found ancient scrolls that spoke of Isa, a young boy who came from Judea to India in order to study. Notovich wrote a book about it. It was published in 1889, and it was called The Unknown Life of Jesus. And what is more interesting is that if you go along the Indo-Pakistan border, now this is where you can really connect the dots. If you go along the Indo-Pakistan border, this is a picture of that. There's a town called Mari, and it has an unmarked grave which is known as Mai Mari the Asthan. The Punjabi translation is the final resting place of Mary. Supposedly that place where Mother Mary, Jesus' mother, had to be buried because she was old and infirm. So it brings me back to the concept of connecting the dots. There's a lot more that I want to share. In fact, I could go on for another probably an hour or so, but I had committed that I will wind this up in 10 minutes, so I'm not going to go further. I'm going to stop it right there. The rest of it we can cover in the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. Let's just offer a small prayer before I start. Omagyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Very grateful to all of you all for coming here. Very grateful to Mr. Ashwin Sanghi for really sharing an amazing insight to a lot of history. Very grateful to Vinod Advani ji for being here, and I'm very grateful to the organizers, Mr. Kumar and Jacob Publishing. So, you may be wondering, what am I doing here in a non-fiction festival when I have written a book which is considered by many to be fiction? But I'm here to present to you something which will help you all understand the non-fiction element in a fictionalized thought process. So, the name of the book, if you notice that I have written, is called Ramayana, the Game of Life. So, the title itself shows you the connection between the two worlds. When we can learn something from some source, why to close our eyes to it? So, histories like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, if you understand them in the right perspective, in Sanskrit, where the terminologies come from, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata are called as Itihas. There are Puranas, there are Upanishads, there are Vedas. And then there is something known as Itihas. Under Itihas, only two books are mentioned. The two are Ramayana and the Mahabharata. What does Itihas mean in English? It means history. So practically, this is a narration of ancient histories. Just like he was quoting about Amitabh Bachchan. Somebody in the future, they may say that he never existed. Or they may start questioning whether he existed or no. In a similar light, when thousands of years pass, when we lose track of history, they sometimes can sound very fascinating. Let me tell you some things from history today, which you may not be able to believe when I tell you. Rana Pratap, history. But if you understand what kind of personality he was, you will say it is fiction. His armor was weighing 100 kilos. His spear was weighing 80 kilos. And with 80 kilos holding in his hand, and with an armor of 100 kilos, he would travel on a horse. And the horse would climb a mountain on 3 legs. And he jumped across the mountain and saved his life. It's a perfect combination for a good fiction. But it's history. Because it has happened in a recent time which we can have access to. Similarly, when histories which we do not have access to because of the separation of time, they come to be known as mythologies. So with this in mind, let me proceed a little bit and share with you some things which will help you connect some dots, as he said. So I'm here to show you what we can learn from these histories. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories from the Ramayana in the way I have written it, and I'm going to tell you what we learn from these stories so that you can appreciate the practical application of these books. So here is a story of the Ramayana where there was a king whose name is Vishwamitra, and he happened to come to a forest where he saw a sage whose name was Vashishta. So the sage had a cow which was a wish-fulfilling cow. So somehow or the other, Vishwamitra, he wanted to have that cow. So Vashishta was not ready to part the cow with Vishwamitra because the cow was practically giving him what he needed. So Vishwamitra, being a king, he started bargaining with the sage. He told the sage, I want this cow on any cost. And he offered him an offer. He said, in exchange for this one cow, I'll give you 1 lakh cows. So it's a good offer. Vashishta said, the cow, Shabala, the name of the cow, is like my mother. And I don't barter my mother. Vishwamitra, he took this answer in a different way. Business-minded. He thought the offer was less. So he decided to increase the offer. He said, in exchange for your 1 cow, I'll give 14,000 elephants. I'll give 800 golden chariots. I'll give 11,000 horses and 10 million cows. Now, Vashishta still said the same thing. Sorry, I don't barter my mother. What we learn from this is what I call as the game of life. So in life, we are going to come across different situations which are going to create twists and turns in our personal lives. How do we handle challenges that come in our life determine what our life is made up of. One man, his name is Peter Burwash. He wrote a book which is titled as The Dash of Life. What is the meaning of dash of life? When you read a tombstone, somebody who has left, you read it as 1970-2020, whatever. The dash, you know what it indicates? That dash indicates your entire life. What is the quality of your dash? Indicates whether you have lived a life of substance or not, whether you will be remembered or not. So, when I say Ramayana, the game of life, what I mean to say is that when turns and twists happen in life, how do we handle it? So here was Vishwamitra and Vashishta going through a certain twist and turn in their life. Vashishta never expected that Vishwamitra will walk down one day to his house and offer him like this. And Vishwamitra never expected that he will discover a cow that can fulfill all your desires. That's how life is. So Vishwamitra was trying to drag prosperity into his life. And he was trying to drag prosperity out of Vashishta's life. Because the cow represents prosperity. So the lesson that we learn here is that Vashishta treated the cow as a person with the highest respect. Vishwamitra treated the cow as a commodity. When you treat people as commodities, each person has a price tag. This is what life is today. The whole concept of use and throw, when it comes to things, it seems to be fine. But with the same concept of use and throw, when it comes to people, it can become disgusting. So here, we learn from this particular episode in the story, how life has to be handled. I'll tell you another very interesting story from the Ramayana, which is not in the first book, but is going to be in the third book. This is a story which everyone knows, but it's a story which nobody understands lessons from. This is a story on relationships. How do you handle tough relationships? Miscommunication and misunderstanding, conflicts in relationships. This is a story where Ram, Lakshman and Sita, they are in the forest and the golden deer comes into their life. In everyone's life, at some point of time or the other, a golden deer comes. How do you handle the golden deer indicates how you handle different aspects of life. So when Sita saw the golden deer, immediately she wanted it. She told Ram, please get this golden deer for me. Ram went away, telling Lakshman that please stay here and guard Sita. Make sure that you don't leave this place. Ram went away, and after some time they heard a voice, a loud scream, the voice of Ram, where he was shouting out to Sita and Lakshman. Immediately Sita felt that Ram is in trouble. He needs help. So she tells Lakshman, go and help him. Lakshman says, come on, Ram cannot be in trouble. So she really becomes anxiety ridden. And she says something that really hurts Lakshman very badly. Mind you, this is a part of the story which is 13 years after the exile has begun. After 13 years, just imagine what Lakshman is hearing. And for 13 years, Lakshman has not slept one night. When I say he didn't sleep one night, it doesn't mean that he was sleeping all day long. He was not doing a call center job. So, Lakshman, he was attentive all day long, guarding them, and all night long, protecting them and serving them practically. After all that, this is what he has to hear. Sita tells him that I know why you have come with us to the forest. You have come with us to the forest because you're waiting for an opportunity when Ram goes away so that you can enjoy me. Doubting his character, Lakshman doesn't speak one word. Lakshman is not a person who keeps quiet generally. If you study the character of Lakshman across the Ramayana, he's an angry young man. At the drop of the hat, he's getting wild and angry. But here he keeps quiet. And then later on, when he goes towards where Ram is, and Ram finds him coming, Ram asks him, "What are you doing here? I told you not to come." And then they find that Sita is missing. Ram gets angry on Lakshman. He calls him a useless person. He says, "You're incompetent, you're useless." Again, Lakshman doesn't speak one word. Can you imagine two people you have given your life to, your youth to, the comforts of your life to? Practically you have given everything to these two people. One doubts your character and another doubts your competence. If somebody doubts your character and competence, why would you continue living with that person? If anybody else was in Lakshman's place, they would have said, "Hell with both of y'all. I'm going back," But Lakshman didn't say that. Lakshman stopped and he lived with them and continued serving them even more. I'll pause the story here and I'll tell you what to learn from the story. This is the game of life. Each and every one of us in our lives, we come across a situation like this, where the person we love the most insults us in a way we cannot expect, we cannot tolerate, we cannot handle. And when insult comes from a person whom you love a lot, whom you trust a lot, that is even more hurting than a person whom you don't know at all or whom you have no faith in. How do you handle such a situation in life? Here, what did Lakshman do as soon as he heard the insult? Most people, when they come through a situation like this, they react. Lakshman didn't react, he responded. What he did basically was, he pressed the pause button. When a movie is going on and you want to think for some time what really happened, you press the pause button. But in life, unfortunately, you cannot press the pause button because your actions are too fast. Your reactions are too fast. But if you really want to handle life in the right way, we have to learn to press the pause button. But after pressing the pause button, what do? That's more important. Lakshman, he paused for one moment when he heard Sita insulting him and he thought, why is she speaking like this? Does she really mean this? And then he realized that she doesn't mean it. Her love for Ram is coming out in the form of these words. And then when Ram is speaking those words, insulting him, does he really mean it? No. The love that he has for Sita is coming out in the form of those words. So what Lakshman did, what inspired Lakshman to pause? That's very important. What really inspired Lakshman to pause is that 12 years Sita and 25 years Ram have deposited their love on this person. For 25 years, he has seen them giving positive love. He has seen them not committing mistakes like this. He has seen them interacting with him in a very, very amazing way. And here, first time he comes through a situation where they are overreacting. That time, rather than reacting himself, he decides to respond, pauses. And then he says, this is the time I don't have to defend myself, but I have to assist them. This is life. Another section of the Ramayana, I will stop with this, is where Ram is going to be coronated king the next day morning. And the previous evening, he has been declared to be the king of Ayodhya from next day. Everyone knows it. The entire Ayodhya is celebrating a festival. He has been fasting, preparing himself for the next day morning's coronation. And next day, early in the morning, he's called to the palace of Kaikeyi and is given the news that he has to be in the forest for 14 years and Bharat is going to become the king. There is an analysis of what is the facial expression of Ram when he is entering into the palace of Kaikeyi, and what is the facial expression of Ram when he is coming out of the palace of Kaikeyi. When he is going in as a king of the world. And when he is coming out as a beggar. Isn't this how life is? Many times people go through situations in life like this, where in one moment, everything changes. All your plans, all your imaginations, all your expectations of life have changed in one moment. What do you do in such moments? How do you handle life in such moments? Determines what is your mindset. Ram, when he was going in and when he was coming out, absolutely no change in his facial expression. In fact, the previous evening when he was declared to be the king of Ayodhya from the next day, when he was announced that there is going to be a coronation the next day, after hearing the announcement also, there was no change in Ram's facial expression. It was not that he was ecstatic. It was not that he was happy. He was just normal. You know why? He was thinking, so far I have been serving Ayodhya and the society in a certain way, certain capacity. And now I'm given a higher responsibility, higher service. But my position still remains the same. What is my position? Servant. And then, now that my father is banishing me to the forest for 14 years, still my position is still the same. I am the servant. So this consciousness helped Ram retain stability. So like this, there are so many stories in the Ramayana which can help us understand the story, the concepts in our practical day-to-day life. For me, as Ashwin was saying, whether these books are mythology or not, whether you choose to call them mythology, fiction, I choose to call them history, realities, whatever the difference may be, but the essence is still the same. Can we learn something from them? Our life is going to go through twists and turns. The game of life is going to change at every moment. We do not have the choice to change the game. When small children play, whenever they are losing, I remember in my childhood when we used to play, whenever my friend would lose a game, he would close down the chessboard, he would close the carom board, he would say, no, I want to change the game. New game now. Can we do the same thing in life? Unfortunately not. So that is when we have to learn, these are the books, these are the stories, these are histories which can tell us how to handle life when the game of life changes. Thank you very much.
Wind up the session in the next 15 minutes. So I don't know whether we should really, what I'm going to do in that case is I'm really not going to ask anything. What I'm going to do is ask one question. How many of you are asleep? No? Okay, whoever is awake, please raise your hand. So I've got pockets there that either don't want to raise their hands or are asleep. I'm going to ask that gentleman there at the end, sitting next to the lady in blue. Would you stand up, sir? Thank you. What's your name? Rakesh. Rakesh, what question would you like to ask Ashwin?
You need me to supply you a question?
That would be better. Sit down. My friend there in the, how are you? Check shirt. Do you have a question?
I could ask Swamiji. These are very interesting, lessons that you taught us from the Ramayana. How did you come across these? Did your guru tell you, or did you made it yourself, or you pondered? Because Ramayana doesn't, say that this is the lesson that you learned. So your response, sir.
That's a good question. Before he answers, does anybody else have a similar or a different kind of question on Ramayana? Not Ramayana. I'll come to you. You have a question on. You have a question on Ramayana? Okay. My question to Swamiji, Shubh Vilas ji, has always been the possibility of worshipping Krishna ji and then writing a book on Ramayana, which to me are, according to me, two different, start from the point of view of ritual, go to the point of understanding, or go right to the other end of the spectrum, which is belief that both are one or one is both. Would you like to answer that?
Should I answer your question first or his question
No,
first?
no, but relate the both together. The
Okay.
two questions, yeah.
So let me ask you a question. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you a question. What is the difference between Coolie, Shahenshah, Sharabi, and Amitabh Bachchan?
I think Ashwin is best equipped to answer. Absolutely, Ashwin. Do you have the hand mic for Ashwin? Yeah. Why don't you bring it here? Because everybody here seems to have very good voices, excepting us, so they're gonna.
No,
okay, fine.
we can share, Swamiji. and I.
Thank you, thank you.
To my mind, honestly speaking, weren't the first three movies, and then of course the actor in the movie. I mean, right?
Absolutely. Sorry, I wasn't testing your knowledge. What I was trying to do was, I was just trying to answer his question. If a same person comes in a different role, that doesn't make him a different person. It just gives him a different flavor. A president of a country, when he's in the office, he's having a suit and tie, or maybe a dhoti and a kurta in India, or he is polished, elegant, carrying himself in a very, very regal manner, answering phone calls in a certain way and things like that. When he comes home, his grandson is sitting on his back and making him a horse. Is he a horse or is he a president? It's the same thing. So when the same person comes as Ram, he is in his formal, official role. And when he comes as Krishna, he's in his unofficial, homely role.
Lovely, thank you. I'm going to, next question. You had a question.
I think I didn't answer his question. So his question, in one sentence I'll answer your question. So the answer to the question is, when I study these books, I always study them from the perspective of what I can learn from them. Blind following is unhealthy. But when you understand what you're reading from the perspective of application, the knowledge comes alive. So I always prefer to study books in this way.
Lovely, thank you. Young gentleman here, you had a question. Please go ahead.
So, considering the topic of this discussion, mythology as history, so these characters like Rama, Krishna, so since we are considering them as real people now. So there must be some point of time in their lives where they underwent some rigorous training or something like that. So that phase has been completely disappeared because of our traditional way of treating them as some god's avatar or something like that. So what if what if that story has been brought out in front of people? It will be really inspiring. So what is your take on that?
Should I?
That phase of their life?
Yeah, sure.
I like to think about mythology as a game of Chinese whispers. I don't know how many of you as kids have played Chinese whispers. 10 people sitting around in a circle and you whisper something into the ear of the person next to you. And then that same statement is moved around from 10 people. But what goes in and what comes out are substantially different. In our system in Bharat, for the longest time we had much more of a verbal and oral tradition rather than a written tradition. I mean, writing came into existence sometime around 300 odd BC with the Brahmi script, but we had the Vedas and so many other pieces of text which were being conveyed orally for thousands of years prior to that. But of course, there were also stories. I mean, you saw right now, for example, Swamiji could have gone on for another couple of hours and I would have been loved to be sitting here and listening to some more stories. That is the tradition of our country. We grew up on stories. But the other tradition in our country is also that we layer it with our own perspective, our own imagination. Honestly speaking, we have never distinguished in our country between Itihas and Puran. I mean, you can read history which sounds like fiction, and you can read, you can read fiction that sounds like history. I mean, so that fact and fiction distinction is is a matter of semantics, really. So if you take these stories, probably there is a kernel of truth in terms of the original story. But think about it, when we started out, we had 25,000 verses of the Jaya, which became 50,000 verses of the Bharat, and eventually became 100,000 verses of the Mahabharat. So I would imagine that a substantial amount of individual perspective. I'm trying to use the word perspective so that I don't use the word mirch masala. But the fact is that we embellished our stories. And so to a very great extent, I don't think that mythology is something which is in the nature of a static story. It is an evolving story. Probably if, let's say, we were to have a nuclear blast tomorrow morning, and think about it this way, that the only book available after that nuclear blast is my book, the Krishna Key. And someone comes along 200 years later and sees it, he will say, oh, this could have actually happened. In other words, that will be his version of history. When I was writing Chanakya's chant, I didn't have any proper story on Chanakya except for the Mudra Rakshas, which itself was a Sanskrit play written 900 years after his life. So how much of that was fact and how much fiction? But now we take it as history. So I would say that it's important to understand that mythology is an evolving story, and it is embellished over the generations. But that doesn't take away from the core truth.
So that leads me to a very interesting question. Just for a moment, I want all of you to think that neither of our friends are here, and I'm the only one on stage. And here's my question. How many of you believe that Jesus was fiction? Raise your hands. Nobody. How many of you believe that Krishna was fiction? You do. One. Good. You believe Krishna was fiction. Fine. Interesting. Anybody out there? Okay. So, conversion has taken place now in this afternoon? I think that really is perhaps what the organizers had in mind, is that how we view, he was using the word perspective. You can use a similar word, which is called prism, how you choose to see through the prism in your mind, whether you think of Lord Ram, or whether you think of Jesus, or whether you think of Krishna as being either mythological figures which were written by some very imaginative people, or that they actually existed and therefore their lifestyles, their lifetimes were recorded as histories. Therein lies, I think, our journey in life, because how much we choose to believe that in many ways is what governs our lives. And that, in a way, is what Shubh Vilas ji is trying to bring about in his book. I'm equally fascinated by, I've read all three books of Ashwin, I'm a great fan of his, and how much of conversion may have happened in his mind. We're going to leave that for next year. Do you have any final questions for our panelists? Yes, you do. Young lady there?
I have something to add
Sure.
to his perspective also.
Yeah, sure.
Can I?
Sure, please.
Just that I heard a very interesting comment and analysis from him. So I just thought I should support him by sharing my views. So your question about where did these people undergo training? There is a fact that each of them, Krishna and Ram, both underwent training in the Gurukul. And there are details of what training they underwent also. So yes, everybody has to undergo training, that's for sure. But I also would like to add the fact about the Chinese whispers. He was giving this example. I'll tell you one example from the Ramayana which shows you how Chinese whispers have been dealt with in Ramayana and Mahabharata. There is one verse, one place where Kaushalya is telling Ram, she is in tears because Ram is going away for exile. So that time she is telling Ram that for so many years I have been waiting for this coronation to happen. And that time she tells Dasha Saptacha Varshani. She uses this terminology to indicate the age of Ram. This terminology, what it translates to, Dasha means 10, Sapta means 7. Dasa Saptacha Varshani means, technically what is the age it comes to? 17. But actually Ram at that point of time was about 25. How do you understand this? That's when we need help of teachers called acharyas or guides. The word cha, whenever it is used in Sanskrit after a number, that number has to be added again one more time. So Dasha Sapta Cha means add 7 again. So 17 plus 7 is 24. That's how it comes to the right number. So if that word cha was missing from that sentence through Chinese whispers, you would never know the right age. Exactly. That's how when you study without aid of assistance of the teachers, then you make mistakes. Then Chinese whispers take over. But when you have teachers, those teachers make sure that the cha is exactly there.
Adding a little color.
I mean, none of the Ramayana, they don't even watch the Ramayana serials. But if you tell them, look, and I think, I mean, today there is online ragging, there is online bullying. Somebody puts some wrong comment on Facebook, you lose your self-esteem. And I think this lesson of Lakshman, what you said, just amazing. I really been touched with you, sir. My name is Rajiv Gupta, and I work for a company that actually carries out this expect that maybe you can my company is, yes, my company is teaching. Can I write it? Yes. There's a reason for that. I tell you, anybody who is connected to the Lord, all that he holds, nobody else can hold that. Because there are many things that you expect of that, but essentially it's this.
What Swamiji explained in the book, I mean in his talk, is there in the book like this? Yes. Is there in the book? It's got the story and then got some lessons in the, as footnotes.
I go and give talks at the several school principals, and I use a term, overstimulated and under-engaged. That's a good one.